Good evening and welcome to this, the regularly scheduled November 27, 2018 Select Board meeting, which I now call to order. The first item on the agenda is to approve the agenda. And in advance of that discussion, I'm proposing that we move item 17, which is to consider entering an executive session pursuant to Vermont statutes annotated 313 para 1 para capital E to discuss Vermont rail litigation up to what could be called 6B, that is following immediately on this town manager report. We're sorry that sometimes we have to make adjustments in time, and in that case we will exit for what we think is a fairly brief executive session. With that in mind, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
So moved by Colleen.
Second.
Seconded by Jamie. Any further discussion? Any discussion in the public? Hearing none, seeing no hands. Those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Mary?
Mary, yes?
You were an aye, we're assuming.
Yes.
Thank you. The next item is to approve Select Board meeting minutes of October 25th and November 13th. Regarding the October 25th meeting, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Jamie and seconded by Josh. Any discussion? Those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And Mary, okay?
Abstain.
Yes, aye.
Aye. And
abstain.
those,
One abstention.
one abstention on the part of Colleen, who was absent. So it's a unanimous 4-0 vote. The next set of minutes are November 13th, 2018. I'll make one minor, very minor comment on page 4. There's a typo in the first motion.
I wanted to make one edit as well on item 15 on the solar panel. I wanted to let the record reflect that I had recused
Yes, that's,
from that discussion. So Mary Ann can just add a sentence to that effect. I'd be
Yeah.
comfortable with.
that's important. Thank you, Jamie.
Yeah, and
Josh?
on the approval of the November 7th meeting minutes, I abstained on that rather than it being 5-0.
November 17.
And this is the minutes, this is the November 13th minutes, but it was the approval of the minutes for November 7th.
Ah, I see. Okay.
So it should be 4.
So it should be 4-0. So we have that correction, we have the minor typo, and Jamie's insertion of the recusal.
Thank you.
Given all of those changes, is there any further discussion? Any in the public? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Mary?
Aye.
Mary included, and those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The next item are public comments. I know Ruth and Kathy are here to make comments about the new library and town center project. Would you like to?
Sure. Okay, so this week, everything I have on my list involves a large piece of machinery. So steel delivery is scheduled for Thursday, which is 2 very large trucks and a crane. The cupola should be re-roofed Friday to Monday, which is a lift or a cherry picker. Stormwater work should start next week, and we all know what that means. Lots of bulldozers. The portico stairs concrete should be poured by Friday, so that's a cement truck. And then work on the original windows is going on right now, which is a lot of ladders. So it's fascinating to go over there and watch the guys move all this equipment around. They actually go out there and tape the site beforehand to make sure that the steel goes here, the cement truck can sit here, the lift is going to sit here. It's going to be a big dance over the next couple weeks of a lot of interesting stuff. So come out and see it.
Thanks, Ruth. Any discussion? Kathy, you want to add anything? All right. Any other public comment? Hearing none, seeing no hands, the next item are select board comments. Josh, do you want to lead?
I don't have anything.
Mary, do you have any?
No, not at this time, thank you.
Colleen?
No.
And Jamie?
Just wanted to thank Paul Goodrich and the team for doing a great job as always on the roads this morning. It was a tough morning for the buses, so thanks to them, and see everybody at the tree lighting as well on Friday.
Yeah, it's kind of neat to see the trees up with the lights strung and, I have none at the time other than to wish everybody had a fine Thanksgiving. The next item is town manager report.
Likewise, just wanted to thank the highway crew for their work today. A lot of towns canceled school or other activities or meetings tonight, but we're all here and everybody got where they needed to be safely. The sewer line project on Falls Road, which we know has been a continuing challenge for folks, we're hoping that some of that work will be wrapping up this week. The sign says reopening by December 1st. We're not entirely sure if that will actually happen, but we're hopeful on that, and we're still negotiating with the contractor. They would like to continue trenching across the roads to finish the final connections to homes on the north side. We would prefer that they not do any more digging in the roads at this late time of year. Pave things, clean it up, and get out of Dodge for the season. So we will know more tomorrow morning when we have our monthly meeting. But stay tuned on that, everyone. We'll let you know. Thank you.
Is Claudine going to be,
She was
We
going to
too
be
early
here by
for it?
7:15. We got through all of this more rapidly than anticipated.
what do you suggest? Perhaps we can,
Dale's here, so we may as well jump into.
yeah, why don't we just move
Right.
on to, with again, everybody's indulgence, we'll move on to the actual 7. Gail?
Yeah, again, I have a little PowerPoint, and Peter's going to put it up there. But I was here 2 weeks ago with a request for an open space fund, which you kindly granted. And I'm here with another one this time. And as I pointed out last time, the open space things happen in interesting ways. And I have a couple of, just so you can see the way that they tend to fall. I have this for you.
Thank you.
It's going the wrong way.
It's okay, we'll share.
And then here's a little history as well.
Great.
And I also have with me John Binhammer from the Nature Conservancy. And John has been working with us on this project. So moving to the first page of the PowerPoint, Peter, I'm asking tonight for $80,000, and this will go towards putting my glasses on. No. Okay, so this is going to go towards a property that I have been working on for some 9 years. And as you know, the last property we asked for was just a few weeks in the making. This one, though, is a property that's located on Cheese Factory Road. It spans both sides of Cheese Factory Road and spans the border between Shelburne and South Burlington. And we actually presented this property to the select board a number of years ago, and I'm not sure that any of you were on the board at that time. But we presented it as a larger piece. Right now, the property is going to be conserved in 2 separate parts. And so the part that we're working with today is with the Nature Conservancy, and John is representing the Nature Conservancy. It's a piece that is 48.1 acres. And it's a portion of a larger farm that was owned by the Ewing family. And we can go to the next page. So the farm is adjacent to a number of other already conserved properties. It's next to the Achilles Natural Area held by Nature Conservancy. It's within 1,200 feet of Shelburne Pond. It's next to Bread and Butter Farm. It's a neighbor to the Maley Borden property, which is off of Spear Street. And it abuts the Eau Claire Farm, which was just conserved by South Burlington for several $1 million, or at least over $1 million. Not sure of the actual figure. Together, and if you look at the map that we'll see on a few pages, the property almost completely buffers Shelburne Pond. And we all know that the value of the waterways in town in terms of how they mitigate stormwater and so forth. This property was initially mentioned to me by John Ewing as far back as 2009. John Ewing has since passed away. He passed away in 2017. But his son, Peter Ewing, has been carrying forward all of the negotiations that have ensued with this. And it's been a very complicated project simply because of the size of the project and the fact that it spans 2 towns. And that the Ewing family has also wanted to put aside a PUD for part of the land, which is in Shelburne. And that has complicated issues because there are rights of way. But all of those issues have been resolved at this point. And the part that we're working with TNC about is ready to go. We can go to the next page now. This shows you a map of the larger area, and the purple areas around there are lands that are already conserved. So you can see how much this is important in terms of Shelburne Pond, which is the big black blob in the middle. The property we're talking about is the red-lined property, and you'll see that it's partly forested, and it's also partly open lands. And the next page gives you a little more of a close-up of the property. And John, maybe you want to step in and just talk a little bit about the values of the property
Sure, absolutely.
and of the portion that you're conserving.
So yes, thanks for having me, by the way. I appreciate it. The Nature Conservancy has spent about 40 years, the last 40 years, piece by piece, helping to protect Shelburne Pond, which is a pretty amazing resource. We're up to about 1,000 acres now, all within a stone's throw of Burlington and the wonderful town of Shelburne. And the wildlife there is just remarkable. So it's really a great resource for your town. And we're happy to be here. We're happy to do all this work. And this piece is really a critical piece, even though it doesn't have pond frontage. It does have frontage on Muddy Brook, which is the outlet stream, and it's part of a large archaeological site that's in that area that's sensitive. One of the top 3 archaeological sites in the state. So, what is the Nature Conservancy doing protecting archaeology? Well, we know that these places have been, they are now important for wildlife, and they have been for wildlife for the past 10 or 12,000 years. And so Native people have utilized the resources here, and we think that's a pretty special thing as well. So the forests here are, it's quite a mix of forests, and they're in great condition, very healthy, mature. And the goal for this property is to convey it to the University of Vermont as part of the H. Lawrence Achilles Natural Area, and with us holding a conservation easement, permanently conserving it forever. So we are approaching, we've approached the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board for funding, and we are approaching the city of South Burlington as well. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Yeah. And I have a couple more pages in this PowerPoint. So the conservation assets are the things that John has just outlined to you. I won't go through them one by one because he already has, but the Nature Conservancy also has a commitment to be able to provide accessibility to this land for research and education. So we can go on to the next page. The assessed value of the property altogether is $525,000 per an appraisal in 2016. The Ewan family, and this was John Ewing's commitment, made a bargain sale donation of $225,000 of that total. The fund request from the open space plan is $80,000, and I don't know how familiar you are with the Housing Conservation Board, but it's very important in their deliberations to know that there's a commitment from the town. And so this really will make a difference to have our commitment, and payment would actually come once the whole closing happens. The VHCB, the Vermont Housing Conservation Board, is going to be asked for something in the range of $100,000, and then any remaining funding will come from that H. Loris Achilles Fund that TNC holds, and from other private sources. So I did a little math this afternoon, and Peter helps me with the math all the time, so I have to thank Peter. But the Shelburne contribution is only 15% of what the total value of this property is, and it seems like it would be a real pity to let it go. So coming to the last page, just a little review of all the assets that it's going to protect. And with this modest investment, we achieve a wealth of protection that Shelburne has annually saved funds to achieve. And on the papers I just gave you, you have a little record of how those savings have really accrued over the years to be able to help Shelburne protect the lands that we have. And I guess either of us would be available for questions.
Thank you, Gail. Are there any questions in the public? Sir?
Would this theoretically be open to Shelburne residents to utilize?
Yes. There will be a right-of-way from Cheese Factory Road to the property that will be open to the public. There's an effort to try to limit public use to some extent because of the archaeological resources. So not sure how that's going to look. And what that's going to look like in the future with UVM ownership. But, you know, there will be a public access requirement of the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board easement. And there will be, according to Peter Ewing, he's planning for a few small parking spaces, like 2 or 3 parking spaces at the beginning of that right-of-way so that people can actually park and then walk out there. But we don't, you know, it's not like we're going to have, you know, a giant parking lot or something like that.
And the other part of this is that unlike some of the other trails that we have, this property is sort of multifaceted, and it is, while it's interesting ecologically, it may be less interesting for people to walk and more interesting for study. So that's kind of the way it's planned at this point.
There's another question in the back, sir?
Yeah, the 520.
Would you?
Mark,
You have
you have to use the.
You have to come up to the phone, Mark.
I should know this. Hi, Mark Brooks, Shelburne resident. The 525 assessed value, just wondering, is that based on the 2016 appraisal at market value? Or since it's an assessed value, is that equalized, which would indicate a lower value than true market value? So,
I can answer that. Thank you. So, good question. So that actually, that is not the assessed value because it's not a separate lot. So this was it was the appraised value for this property in 2016. We are having a reappraisal of the property because 2-year-old appraisal is just too old. And so we'll have new numbers by the middle of next month, and I suspect they will be at least 525 and probably a little higher. I'm guessing 575, something like that. So we'll be getting even a better bargain for the property.
Thanks, Mark. Any other questions? Josh?
Yeah, and this isn't, I mean, I think adding buffer to Shelburne Pond is always going to be a good idea. So I'm just curious about if you have any thoughts on the status of the other properties on either side of this one and even those to the south where Is any thought about the status of any of those adding to all of this? You want to go back to the map, Peter?
The other one is probably a little better. The bread and butter farm lies to the west.
Right.
That has already been conserved. The Eau Claire farm lies on Dorset Street. That was conserved many, many years ago, and it's conserved for agriculture. So those two properties are agricultural. The Eau Claire property, which is in South Burlington, as I just mentioned, was recently acquired or is about to close with a very large grant of something in the range of $1 million from South Burlington. And that property is in South Burlington to the north and slightly to the east. And I'm not sure what other properties you might be looking to.
Is that the one, Gail, that borders Heinsberg Road?
Yes,
Yeah. In both sides?
on both sides, yeah.
And the status of the one sort of at 4 o'clock, sort of,
At 4 o'clock.
I can speak to that. So the Conservancy is, still interested in working with willing landowners to conserve other portions of the pond frontage. We've had conversations with landowners on that side to talk about conservation. Nothing gelled, nothing, they just weren't interested at the time. But we're going to still
keep going.
keep talking with them. I mean, this has been like I said, a 40-year project, and it may take a longer, but we'll hang in there.
And you just never know when some of these things are going to happen. They take a lot of conversation, a lot of family negotiations often. And there actually is another part of this property that is a different kind of natural resource that is also slated, hopefully, to be conserved at some point in the future.
Thanks. Josh, all set? Mary, have you got any questions?
No, I'm good, thank you.
First of all, I'm really excited and happy to have two of these requests come in a row for us. So that just is really good news all around as far as conservation goes. And I'm familiar with this parcel as well from my time on the South Burlington Land Trust. So it has been many, many years in the works. So thank you for your perseverance on this and for the partnership of the Nature Conservancy. It's really critical, and just it's how these all come together. It's sort of a contrast from the Coleman piece, which, as you mentioned, came together very quickly and is sort of plain vanilla. In some ways, this is multi-stakeholder and many years of time and effort to get to this point. So thank you.
Yeah, we're really excited about it, and we're really grateful to the Ewing family. And if Peter were here, I would be congratulating him on his fortitude in having carried this through, because it hasn't been an easy negotiation for him either.
Thank you, Gail.
Colleen?
Thank you.
No, I just echo what Jamie said.
Thank you.
Yeah. For these things, we're happy to see you. I mean, we'll reserve a seat for you. Yes. Yes. But especially
Just,
happy.
so that you can see the history on those sheets that I gave you of the conservation acquisitions that we've made here in Shelburne. The green bordered sheet tells you how many acres we've conserved, and also the sheet that is the printed sheet is information that I've had from Peter. And I think it's just really interesting in closing to be able to look at that sheet and see that over the years, Shelburne has contributed close to $1 million in order to conserve all of that acreage. And at no point has it been something that we've had to go to bond for or anything like that. It's been the commitment of the people of Shelburne, who I have to thank as well for saying yes, and to select boards who've contributed the money to the Open Space Fund to allow us to save for these intermittent and sometimes close together acquisitions.
Thanks, Gail.
Thank you.
Any other,
Gail, as the educational easement takes shape, will you stay in touch with Lee and the town just so we can
Oh, absolutely.
continue to understand what that's going to look like to the extent that there will be some ability for residents
yeah, and that
to
is
use
something
it?
that TNC is really instrumental in being able to pull together.
Great.
And I know that because I spent many years down at the preserve down on Bay Road, and actually met John way back then when he was an intern at TNC. And there's a lot of learning that goes on, and a lot of community input, and a lot of community hours that make these things work.
thanks,
Yeah, and I just wanted to echo your support for Gail and all of her work, because she's been great through this whole project and all of the projects that we've dealt with, the Shelburne Natural Resources Committee. And just want to mention that we'll be working with Gail to set up at least one and maybe more field trips on this property so that townspeople can kind of get out there and check it out.
no, that's a great idea.
Excellent.
Thank you, John.
All right.
Any further discussion? Is there a motion to the effect of approving an $80,000 contribution from the Open Space Fund for these purposes?
So moved.
Moved by Josh, seconded by Colleen. Any further discussion? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And Mary,
Yep,
and that's unanimous. We thank you very much.
And we thank
Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this point, we will return to the amended item that we've informally called 6B, which is the executive session listed on the original agenda as 17. Now, there are motions to the effect of entering that executive session and for purposes thereof.
Sure. Move to find that premature public knowledge regarding the Vermont rail litigation would clearly place the town at a substantial disadvantage.
And any discussion on the first? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Mary?
aye.
And those opposed, nay. Thank you. The next,
Move to enter executive session pursuant to 1 VSA 313(1)E to discuss the Vermont rail litigation to which the town is a party and invite the town's legal counsel, Claudine Safar, and interim town manager, Lee Crone, to participate.
any discussion? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, and those opposed, nay. Mary?
Aye.
Thank you. Thanks, Josh. Claudine will go. Is there a motion to exit the executive session and resume general session?
So moved.
Jamie moves.
Second.
Colleen seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Mary?
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed, nay. The next item on our agenda is number 8, to receive proposed zoning amendments and proposed town plan, as well as to warn hearing dates. And prior to that presentation, we want to thank you for indulging us this change in agenda. Is
So I'll give
Dean going to take the lead, or you, or?
I'll just give a quick update. 2 separate items here. The Planning Commission has approved several zoning amendments that they're asking the Select Board to officially receive and potentially warn hearing dates for. And they're also asking the Select Board to officially receive the proposed comprehensive plan. You're well aware of that work and that process. And again, to consider setting hearing dates for that. Both are important, of course. The town plan is more time sensitive, as you're well aware, because that will expire in February. I have some proposed hearing dates for that, but I'm sure Dean has more background information on these as well.
in light of the amount of time on the agenda, I didn't prepare a formal presentation, but I can elaborate a little bit on a couple of these points. First of all, I gave Lee, through his mailbox, a full-color copy of the entire document, and I'm hoping he has it here so that he can hold it up. But no, he doesn't. But I just wanted to follow up the earlier memo that I had sent, which I believe was included in your packets, which made reference to the fact that we would be having the graphic designer complete the preparation yesterday, and that would allow us to post the complete version on the town's website and supply the board with at least one full color copy of both the plan and the appendices. And so that has happened. As mentioned in the previous memos, the critical actions required of the board are to formally receive the document, and if you do it virtually with the knowledge that it's in Lee's mailbox, that's taking care of the first step. That starts a clock running, which may or may not affect things very much given Lee's recommended date for your public hearing. The reason for formally receiving the document is that it starts what I think of as a 30-day reading period that's established in statute, which came into effect, I think, in the late 80s, when there were some amendments made to the planning statute, where I think people became concerned about the possibility of plans being amended without too much consideration. Mm-hmm. Of course, that's not how it normally works. But if you have on your agenda tonight to formally receive and to set the dates, I believe Lee has recommended the date of January 22nd for the first of what are 2 required public hearings.
February 19th.
And the question would really be up to the board whether or not you warn them both at the same time. I won't get into it now. The memos that I've provided to you have explained what is necessary in the event changes are made to the documents. That's all I will say about the plan. I can touch on the zoning if there are no questions about the plan.
Why don't we deal with the receipt and establishing the dates first, Dean, if that's okay? Are there any questions about receipt or Lee's recommendation that we establish January 22 and as a pencil in kind of February 19?
Yes, those dates were offered just working around the whole budget schedule and trying to make sure we had appropriate time for these hearings.
So is that one?
Can we do that in one
Is
motion?
that one meeting, January 22nd to Feb 19, or is that?
So
That's a
those-
month,
We
right?
need 2 meetings.
So you have to
Right,
have
but
2 separate
between-
hearings. You can warn them in one warning, or you can warn them entirely separately, and Dean's laid out the...
Yeah, I'm asking. There's a meeting in between the 22nd and the 19th, right?
Correct.
Okay. Does it make sense to warn both at this point, since we
I
have
would
dates?
say, because we have an opportunity and timeline to change that second
Second
one,
and fourth.
correct,
The
Lee?
19th isn't a meeting date.
You're right about that.
The 8th, 22nd, and then the 12th and 26th. The 19th isn't a date.
So it's the 12th?
Yeah.
12th. And what else?
And the 26th of February.
And I know there was concern, I believe the current plan expires on the 25th, is that right?
Okay.
If you
So it's
held-
got to be the 12th.
I mean, I'm not trying to play games with dates, but if you did have it on the 26th and the plan's not in effect for one day, it
Well, we may
doesn't
as well
change the
avoid that if
universe,
we
but
can, right?
sooner is better to
Yeah.
make sure in case there's some
Yeah.
complication
I
in
agree,
the
wouldn't you?
process.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, to make sure it gets
Absolutely.
in there.
All
I'm
right, so
comfortable with those dates.
there's a motion to the,
26th.
Do we need a motion to
to
formally
receive and then-
accept?
and
Well, you can have a motion to receive it and set
Set
the
a public
dates. You don't
hearing
need
for-
to
Okay.
do them separately.
there's such a motion?
Move to receive the town plan, the proposed town plan.
And to set a,
And I thought you wanted to do separate, I'm sorry, and to set a public hearing for the first as January 22nd and the second as February 12th.
so moved by Colleen, second.
Second.
Jamie seconds. Any discussion? Gail?
Just having sat through so many of those meetings and heard the complexities of the changes in the plan, is there any concern that there might not be enough time if you folks decide to ask for more changes and the planning commission still has to negotiate and craft those
Well,
changes.
that's what we're guarding against with the second,
Yeah, I mean,
that's
I
why
think
it's,
that's a risk that
it feels tight.
just-
It feels tight to have the final approval a week before the plan
We've-
goes away.
we've had the pleasure of reviewing this for some time. Any further discussion? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Mary?
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Do you want to now lead the second part, or ask Dean to, the amendments?
Sure. So again, same process, different pieces of the puzzle. The Planning Commission's approved several proposed zoning amendments. They would like you to officially receive them and set hearing dates for those. I do not have proposed hearing dates yet in mind, just knowing the budget process, the town plan process. I was hesitant to know how we should proceed on that, what the time frame might be, the urgency of those.
This is for the rural PD changes. Why don't, Dean, if you're willing to just give us a quick overview and maybe orient us on
Sure.
recommended timing.
This proposal has its origins in a request that was made by some property owners in the rural district going back several years ago now. The Planning Commission has looked at this issue in the ensuing years, I think on 3 different occasions. They developed this latest proposal with the input from those property owners who are basically in a position where they have a roughly 14-acre parcel that they can't subdivide given an idiosyncrasy of the Shelburne zoning regulations. And this proposal would allow people in that situation, similar to theirs, to subdivide. And so you can look at it as, on the one hand, what one hand gives, the other hand takes away. This proposal would relax restrictions on parcels that are 15 acres in size or less, but it would offset some of those changes with some additional requirements having to do with PUDs. PUDs are planned unit developments. That's a more extended review process that the town has used in its zoning, I think, almost since day one, or nearly so. And the focus of the PUD process, and it's one that Gail, people like the Natural Resources Committee members know well, is on protecting resources, avoiding impacts, and clustering development. I think that's maybe a shorthand way to put it. Again, given the amount of time that's on the agenda, I didn't prepare any kind of proposal. I can say that, as I mentioned, there would be this allowance for people to subdivide who can't subdivide now. However, they would be forced to go through the PUD process, and some aspects of the PUD review process would become more like they were in years past when there was a higher open space requirement, as one example. The request made by the Planning Commission is that the board warn a public hearing, at which time there could be a full presentation. This proposal has been delayed by a couple of weeks already. I'm not sure that the Planning Commission would support delaying it further. As I mentioned, this is a change that has been requested by property owners who are not here tonight. I believe they winter in Florida. But I think there is this concern that some might have that if it delays too long, we could end up in a situation where they go another year, perhaps, not being able to do what they would like to do. And I know that in the materials, there is some reference to linking this to another possible topic, the allowance for fences in the PUD buffers. I'm not sure that the Planning Commission would react well if they were told that this proposal was held up so that that fence component could be added. And frankly, if the board really wanted to add it, it could before it set a date for a public hearing. If there's a strong feeling on the part of the board to add language having to do with fences, it could do it before it warns this draft for public hearing.
Any questions? And your recommendation, Lee, is to?
If, as the Planning Commission has requested, to set some dates, we can we can look further out and set a date and warn it.
Okay, are we going to do that tonight, or are you going to come back with?
Well, it sounds like we'd rather do that tonight,
Yeah, we may
if
as
that's the
well try
board's.
to just get a date out there for this. It sounds
Just
like there's.
knowing everything else we've had going, I was,
Be pretty
Hesitant.
important to get a position in line, I would say. Have you got some
Is there a reason we
suggestions?
can't
Is
do
it
it
time?
The same time that we, for the plant. I think that's just too much to do on the same meeting day.
well, you never know in advance how smooth or complicated those town plan hearings will be, but we could
We could do
warn,
this first.
we could warn one for, the zoning for February 12, the same night as the second plan hearing.
Oh, makes sense, yeah.
Fine with me. Does
The
that
12th,
timing work, you think, for as good as any? Yeah.
Okay, how do you want the motion?
So if we were going to do that, then a motion to accept those proposed amendments and warn the hearing for February 12 would be in order.
Okay,
Okay, move to accept proposed amendments and warn a hearing for February 12th.
a second.
Second.
Josh seconds. Any discussion? Mary, any discussion?
No, thank you.
Those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you, Dean. The next item is to consider a request of Mr. John McCann for a waiver of the homestead declaration late filing penalty. If, good evening,
Hello,
John.
good evening. Thank you for
Thank-
hearing this. Essentially, I'm just, asking for some leniency. I'm a new resident in town, and I've been filling out the homestead declaration for over 20 years successfully, and I just had a confluence of events, which I outlined in a memo to the board, that I essentially did not file it on April deadline, but with help from Peter Frankenberg, I was able to get it in by September, but there was a penalty, and I guess at this stage, any consideration you would give to waiving that would be greatly appreciated.
Is there any discussion?
Can you remind me the policy?
The list, I don't have it in
The
front of me.
Does anyone
criteria.
have that in front of us?
Yeah, there were a
So
number
I
of,
have that list.
You do?
Oh,
Thank you.
I'm glad
for being
someone's prepared.
He's checked off at least two of them, yeah.
Do you folks have a copy of the memo that I sent?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
But let it be noted, you're more prepared than we are at the moment.
Well, hold on now.
I think I
I
do
think,
have
I
it.
think
Do you have
his
it?
memo outlines several
Yeah.
of the criteria.
You know, he
that
met,
he-
as I
that he
remember,
believed.
two of the three of them, I think.
Are those the
Oh, here we
criteria in
go.
bold?
Those were several of the numerous ones that
That
he felt
list,
were applicable to his case.
Thank you. There we go. Okay.
I
I
looked
don't
at it
know.
before.
You want to see it?
No, I looked at it
So there are
before.
multiple criteria that
Yeah.
are satisfied, I
Yeah.
think,
Yeah,
based
yeah.
on
Yep.
the memo. And
Yeah,
Any discussion? Mary, any discussion?
is there an amount?
Yeah.
That
No,
was,
Do you have a?
Do you have a
It's
penalty?
about $106 is the penalty.
So move to waive the homestead
No,
declaration penalty.
I think Mary
Wait a
had
minute.
something.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry,
Mary.
Colleen.
Mary, did you
Sorry.
have something?
I'm sorry.
Did you have something to add?
I can't hear you, Josh.
I'm sorry, did you have something to add?
No.
Okay, I'm
Thank
sorry,
you.
I thought you did.
Colleen?
Move to waive the homestead declaration penalty of $106.
For
The homestead, it was
For-
the penalty.
John McCann.
Oh, for John McCann at 142 Lakeview Ave.
Second?
Second.
Jamie seconds. Any further discussion? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Mary?
Aye.
Aye, it's unanimous. Thank you very much for
Thank you so
coming.
much, I
You're
really
welcome.
appreciate it, thanks a
Would you
lot.
like this back, Mr. McCann?
Oh, no, by all means.
You're okay? Okay.
Mission accomplished.
Sorry. And you won't need it again, right?
I'll be right on time.
We're very happy you've joined us in Shelburne. Thank you. The next item is regards the school resource officer for Champaign Valley U High School, and this will be a presentation of the concept and implementation.
We did. We skipped over the fences piece
Oh,
on
I
agenda
thought we
item
dealt
number
with that.
9. No, this is a different one.
Okay.
Yeah, we had 3 zoning
My
related.
mistake.
items.
I thought we had dealt with that. We won't disappoint you, Dean. Let's return to 9, which is to consider asking the Planning Commission about a zoning change for fences in PUDs.
So this relates to a long-running litigation with a private property owner who had applied for a fence, was denied by the Development Review Board under the current rules, appealed to the Environmental Court. It was decided in a particular direction. We discussed it, asked for a reconsideration of that case, which was not approved by the court. So technically at this point, it's been remanded to the Development Review Board for reconsideration, which would likely churn through the process, send us right back to court again because the rules are still the same. It has been discussed, the possibility of the Selectboard considering asking the Planning Commission to change those rules. In this case, it requires a 75-foot setback for all structures within the buffers in this particular area of town. The definition of structure includes fences. So you can imagine the challenge to a homeowner who had to put a fence 75 feet inboard from their property lines. So not asking the Select Board to advocate for any particular position, but to consider asking the Planning Commission to consider changing that bylaw to delete fences or somehow exempt fences from that setback. We can't guarantee that the owner involved will not continue to try to pursue his remedies through the DRB. We're trying to negotiate to ask the homeowner to hold off. Let us all hold off on the DRB, see if the Planning Commission would be willing to consider changing the rules, and if so, let that process play out. And if we can come to that agreement, we'd all agree that nobody's waiving their rights to pursue their remedies, but let's see if it even makes sense to change the rules before churning our way back through court again.
I do want to add one clarification to Lee's explanation of the legal decision. The town won essentially 4/5 of the points. The 5th point that the town did not prevail on was really having to do with one aspect of the public hearing. At that public hearing, the property owner wanted to make the argument that this rule in our zoning regulations hasn't been followed, and that the town has allowed, and in fact has granted permits for fences in periphery buffers in PUDs. That's the only point on which the town lost. So the remand to the DRB is simply to give this property owner the opportunity to make that case, because the first time he tried to do it before the DRB said, you know, we're not going to go there. We're not going to listen to an argument that the town hasn't been consistent in applying its laws. So that's the issue before the DRB. The only question that the DRB will be accepting testimony on is whether or not the town has had a pattern of issuing permits for fences in PUDs or has allowed violations to occur in buffers or has had somehow unequal treatment of buffers. I just want to make it clear, it's not like the idea of fences in periphery buffers was found to be somehow erroneous as part of the decision, because in fact the judge agreed with all of the town's arguments about what the zoning regulations mean, and the zoning regulations do in fact mean that a periphery buffer around a PUD is intended to be an open area and wouldn't have encroachments like fences in it.
So do you think, do you think that that concept that is worthwhile given this situation? Is it worthwhile for the Planning Commission to revisit it just in that regard of saying, yes, given what we know now, or looking at that history, is it a good time to revisit that and say, does this make sense?
Well, generally speaking, if requests are made to look at the zoning regulations, the planning commission looks at those if it has the time available to do that. This situation is not unlike one that happened out on Shelburne Point, where it wasn't the buffer for the PUD, it was the lakeshore setback. And the lakeshore setback didn't allow someone to put a fence in an area where certain types of structures are allowed. In that particular case, the town won. And the property owner came, I believe, to the select board, or at least to the manager, and the idea or the understanding is that the property owner would come to the planning commission and float this idea. How about you expand the list of structures that are allowed in the lakeshore setback from 5 to 6? And the planning commission agreed, and that change took place.
That situation was a little different.
It was a little different. I'm just saying that
Right.
it was the idea of the town having gone to e-court and having had a favorable decision, and it could have been, it could have resulted in a lot of time and money being spent on litigation. We all said, let's take a pause, let's see what happens if, and in that particular case, the property owner and his attorney came to the planning commission and made this proposal. What do you think about changing the regulations? This one is analogous, but it's not the same, in that the idea is the zoning regulations currently don't allow a certain type of structure in a certain place within a development. I think the planning commission would be more inclined to consider it if they understood that if either the property owner came to them and said, here's the situation, would you consider it? My understanding is that hasn't happened to date. Or if this body said, it might be a good idea, because they're on the agenda for the planning commission meeting Thursday night. 3 other items in addition to this one, which was included because we expected some kind of discussion to take place. The priority of this item could go up if there's the clear sense that this board would like the planning commission to give it some attention. If it was not expressed, then I think it would really be incumbent on the property owner to speak up. That property owner is expected to go back to the DRB for their hearing, I believe, on the 22nd of December.
Well, it seems to me there's general worth to the idea, and certainly short of
To what
anything
idea?
of asking the planning commission to revisit this.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
I don't want it to be an endorsement or
No, I was gonna
understood
say-
as any sort of.
No,
I was just going to say, short of
I
advocacy,
agree.
that's clear.
I mean, it's
but-
it's
I mean,
it's
I-
just a reevaluation.
Yeah,
Yeah, we've spent significant legal fees on this, and
yeah.
it might be sensible to at least ask
Right.
them to consider it. Again, no one's suggesting in any way that you should advocate for a
No, I
position
agree. I
on
think
this.
that'd be
And I
very
think-
inappropriate, yeah.
And I think that's a good point. If I think the planning commission can evaluate it, given that this is something that could happen in the future as well. And I don't think we should change regulations just because lawsuits are brought. But if there is a reasonable way to alter it to make things easier or that don't interfere with the intent of the planning commission, then it seems like a reasonable way to go.
Mary?
Yeah. I read the Dean's proposal to the ordinance, and my thought is that we should really consider the proposed amendment, because the way that the current regulation reads, it kind of is odd, right, to have such a big setback for a fence. Seems to make no sense. And I agree with Dean's assessment on the litigation in terms of the error that the DRB made, according to Judge Walsh. But I also think the current state of the ordinance could be revisited. So I agree with that. I also think that I would like to see the matter get put to rest too. So I think there are 2 goals to achieve, and I think an amendment might do that. And I think it'd be cost effective as well.
So Mary, I might have misheard you, but are you endorsing the amendment as written right now? Or just
No,
endorsing the
no,
planning
I-
commission looking at
I
it?
think it's something for the planning commission to take
Okay.
up.
Okay.
Comfortable?
Yeah,
I
I'm
do
fine
endorse
with
Do we need
asking
a
them to
motion?
consider it beyond that.
Probably be
I don't
helpful
think
to
we
have
need
a,
it. Do you think we need a motion?
I think, based on Dean's explanation, if the board were so inclined, I think a motion would help move that along.
So we formally ask you to communicate our interest in this being reviewed at their convenience, something along those lines?
Sure.
Is there a motion to that effect?
Yeah, so
Jo-
moved.
Josh moves. A second?
Second.
Colleen seconds. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Mary?
Aye.
Aye. The ayes have it. Thank you. Now we return to the school resource officer issue. And you want to
So-
introduce that?
Sure. This is a matter that's been in discussion for a number of months now, as you're well aware. The school district board directed staff to find a way to implement the placement of a school resource officer at CVU. And so several communities were approached about that idea, which police department might be able, interested, and willing to provide a resource officer. Officer Bob Lake is here to help answer any questions as well. From the Shelburne's perspective, we were very interested from the outset, but we were also very concerned about not wanting to intrude on anyone else's turf. Certainly Heinsberg's, the town where the school is located. Williston was also approached. For various reasons, Shelburne's proposal was deemed by the district to be the most advantageous and acceptable. We began to investigate candidates who might be ideally suited for that position. One has been identified, has been vetted and interviewed by the police department here as well as by the principal at CVU. And this would be a concept where an officer would be hired, placed in the school during the school year. The school district would be paying 100% of the costs of that officer and vehicle while they are on duty at the school. And then there's plenty of work that that officer could do here when they're not on duty at the school. In many cases, it may be filling in shifts when officers are out training, sick, vacation. So from a town's perspective, it could actually cost us less to have that officer on for those other times than backfilling with overtime shifts. We are ready and able and willing to provide that person begin their appropriate training. Just wanted to bring the board up to speed. You've seen the agreement. We feel comfortable with it and wanted to make sure that you were okay with it before we hit the go button on that. And again, Officer Bob Lake's here if you have any questions from the
Bob, you
police
wanted to
department's
speak to it?
perspective.
Generally?
It's a great idea. It's something that's been talked about for several years at CVU. And it's the largest high school in the state, 1,400 between students and staff. And we're happy to be able to step in and fill that role that they feel they need, and we feel like we can supply the manpower. Just know that one of the things, there's been some talk about having an armed police officer in a uniform at the school, and one of the things that we're going to work with the school is that officer's going to be dressed down some days, dressed up other days. So,
But armed?
but armed, yes. Not always in uniform.
And the goal of this is to build relationships and trust, not just to be an enforcement officer, but hopefully by building relationships with the students and the staff, hopefully head off issues that might otherwise arise.
I've had two questions. One is, I want us to be assured that this person maintains all the rights and privileges of a town employee. That person is not subject to someone else's personnel policy or demands or expectations that might exceed ours. And that secondly, there's a well-understood protocol in terms of response in situation that I'm sure you could tell us in some detail differs from many other enforcement situations and would involve different kinds of people, many more of them, many other events, and so on and so forth, which might, I'm assuming, have to have been developed by now so that that officer's operating under some clear expectations.
Yes. So to answer your first question, the individual that will be hired to go to CVU will be a Shelburne Town employee and will answer to the chief of police, Aaron Noble, or Noble's designee. Now, he's going to have to work cohesively in the school with the principal and guidance counselors. Not every situation has to result in somebody being charged with a crime, but that individual will know that they are a Shelburne Town employee and subject to the accolades or disciplinary action of a Shelburne employee.
And are there specific protocols, Bob, that are developed in terms of how you respond in situations?
So there's training that will take place for this officer, from everything on how to deal with a student who's having personal issues, possible domestic violence issues at home, just needs somebody to speak with, to the potential of an unfortunate active shooter situation.
So those protocols will certainly, some will already exist through other entities, some will clearly be evolving in collaboration with the PD and the
Some I
school.
realize are not for public consumption, obviously, but I'm just concerned that that person have every opportunity at a lot of clarification, because no doubt that any number of situations could develop
Right.
there pretty quickly that might be new to the force. So.
I'm just following up on your comment about training there. I mean, it is very specific about the training that this officer would have, but it also indicates that if that officer is absent or not able to be there, then potentially another Shelburne police officer would go in instead. How do you gauge with that, whoever the substitute is, would they also have that training?
Every attempt is going to be made to make sure that obviously the second officer will have all of the training that the first. As you know,
So
that
there
there's
might
gonna-
be a designated backup.
Yes.
Any other discussion? Any questions in the public? When does the person begin?
Bob?
So we're looking at February 4th. I believe that's a Monday, the first Monday in February. So, and it's at this point, it's a 2.5-year contract, ends in 2021, so.
And is this officer is already an existing officer of the Shelburne Police Department?
He's not an existing officer, but he is a veteran officer,
Okay.
18 or 19 years experience.
Has the agreement gone through legal review?
I have not had counsel
Probably
review
should,
it.
right? I mean, I would recommend we do that, just given things could,
We discussed.
there's just liability issues we should be aware of. I mean, if an incident happens there and
Yeah,
there's
absolutely.
a lawsuit, the town can
Yeah.
be named as a defendant.
No, I mean, it's an
Yeah.
interagency agreement. I think we ought to.
I think we should.
For sure.
Yeah.
And we apparently have the time.
Well, at this point in time, would be of the essence. We want to get the individual on board and get him some training that would need to take place. He has, we'd also want to make sure that we get his equipment and whatnot. So we don't want to do it until we get the blessing, your blessings.
Okay.
And
Well,
is there-
we may need to go another meeting.
I don't
Yeah.
need to see, I'm comfortable
Yeah.
at this point, as long as Brian gets eyes on this and
Yeah.
takes an hour. It's a 3-page contract, so it's not going to take them long to do.
Get right on it.
Yeah.
Unless you feel you should bring it back to us.
If there was something extraordinary, I'd probably bring
Yeah.
it back to you. If there were no or very, very minor
Yeah. I think
changes.
it needs to come back.
What we're
If you'd be
talking about a
okay.
little bit here is that this is a town manager decision, a personnel decision on the part of the town manager. It would not be the boards to intrude or intervene in that, but it's also an interagency agreement with a body outside the town, so that there's kind of a fuzzy line, and we're just being sure that we're as prudent as we should be, so. No, Thank you.
have a couple of other questions. So is there a promise by the police department to provide any other hours to this officer when he's not working at CVU?
At this point, no.
Okay, and then like benefits?
He'll be entitled to benefits through the town as long as his employment is 28 hours, I believe. That would be a Peter. So any more than 28 hours, an individual, whether it be the police department or others, wouldn't be entitled to benefits of a full-time or equivalent employee.
Okay, and the cost of the benefits is being paid out of the existing police department budget?
No, the benefits with this officer would be paid out of the contract.
Okay.
Do you anticipate a point at which there might even be a rotation, Bob, of 2 or 3 others, perhaps, following Josh's question? Or is it so specialized that you?
Now I'd be speaking for Chief Noble, so I don't want to go that far out.
Yeah.
But I would say for the next 2.5 years, we would try to keep the same individual because there is some specialized training. You've got mental health counseling, you've got other specific trainings that school resource officers go to or go through that we would want to keep the same person in place for that period of time.
What, wasn't Williston or Heinsberg, specifically Heinsberg, interested in providing an officer?
There was, I'm not,
I don't know.
there was discussions with them, I know, and in the end, we were approached.
Okay.
Thank you, Lee. We'll
Thank
look
you.
to you. And thank you,
Get
Bob,
right on
very
it.
much. Please thank the chief. Any other discussion on that? Hearing none. The next item is to consider extending all appointed terms for all committee, board, and commission members for 1 year.
So the suggestion, this suggestion arises just from a timing transition perspective. Normally, we have quite a process for applications for board members. Just due to circumstances, we're beyond that point in the calendar. So I was trying to think of how do we keep the process moving in an efficient fashion. The idea I'm suggesting is that we consider just extending all terms for 1 year. Next year, management's settled, we get back on track with everything we would normally do. It would keep all the staggered terms in place because if we're not changing anything in the pattern, we're just extending everyone by 1 year. So that was my thought, just to.
My only question about this, and I thought when we approved the most recent CBC guidelines, that all of the terms, we were changing everything, so all the terms were going to renew in April, that we weren't going to have multiple things. So I'm sort of puzzled why that couldn't happen. If all the terms are going to renew in April anyhow, why would we need to extend a year now?
Yeah, 5 months ahead of time.
4 months ahead of time or 6 months ahead of time?
Well, good question. Again, it's just looking ahead, looking at our potential priority list, looking at upcoming hearings on town plans, budget work, and would we really have time to go through that fairly extended process of advertising, interviewing, getting everybody on board? I'm not saying it's impossible, but it just seemed like between the management transitions and everything else that maybe this was one thing we could take off our docket.
Yeah,
I mean, we've had.
remember we talked about those decisions being made before town meeting, so the current board made them, although the appointments are effective April 1, so it's really a February timeframe. And I think this was just a cost of parallel tracks we were following at the time, trying to make the best use of scarce resources. As all of us know, we had a very elaborate process that consumed a good deal of time. I think one of my regrets is that we were going to directly involve chairs in all of those appointments, as well as new appointments. And I think an assessment at this point of what we've got on the table and the time remaining just suggests strongly that we wait for a year to put that entire program in place.
What would we do? What will we do between now? I mean, let's say if we have vacancies now.
I think we'd probably treat them on an ad hoc basis to the degree the policy could apply, and otherwise on an ad hoc basis, such as we had been, with the proviso that we do directly involve chairs, which was a very important feature. And I'm not so sure we wouldn't want to send something on to all the chairs explaining why we valued this change, we look forward to this process, and we're just simply, we're up against some time pressures that aren't going to allow for it to unfold completely. But in any case of vacancy or sudden opening, we would certainly look forward to direct committee chair involvement.
As we have done.
Yeah.
I wonder, before taking this step, it may be worthwhile to query the committees and the committee members of saying, okay, is there get a sense of how many positions this might be relevant to?
I think we could do that. We've indicated that we're a little sensitive to the workload, and we wouldn't want to, in trying to deal with the situation, improve the workload necessarily. But I think we could open a communication with all the chairs.
Of course.
And establish the fact
just to get an idea of how much.
Sure.
Rather than put off something for a whole year.
February's going to come sooner than we think. So, is there any discussion? Any further discussion, Mary?
Yeah.
Mary?
She's on mute.
Sorry. Yeah. No. I understand Lee's position. I don't have a problem with it.
Thanks.
I also don't have a problem with talking with chairs if need be.
Yeah, I just don't know if that's if we don't have to make a decision about that tonight, then I feel comfortable waiting, talking to chairs. I mean, this is something that we could say in January as well.
Yeah, I think the idea
we need
would
to have a
be
whole
to
nother
encourage Lee
conversation about it.
when he has an opportunity to put something together for the chairs. I don't think that has to be an immediate. That's the problem. We got too many immediate things in front of us. So, any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll go on to the next item, which is the priority list work plan. You'll recall that we introduced this.
That's the library. Yeah.
Yeah, library.
13.
Thank you, Sean. The next item is the Library Town Center project complications and costs. I'll learn not to write all over my agenda.
So at our last meeting, we put forward a whole litany of complications and costs that we have run into with the new Library Town Center project, and the numbers were frightful and extraordinary. What we have this evening is a clearer explanation of what those costs are and suggestions on how they can be covered. And Ruth's going to do a presentation. I'll run the. And then after that, we have a representative from Nagley and Chase who would give us a little broader perspective and background on how projects are developed, how contingency funds work, and how those numbers were selected, and how sometimes these complications are just part of construction projects, and that we have done. There was a lot of preliminary investigation done to try to identify these things in advance. Not everything is always discoverable or predictable.
I like that databases are out of date. Your little error message right there, Lee.
I know. I keep trying to make it go away. And if we can get this to full screen.
Do slideshow. Go over to
Only different ways of
the
doing
next one
this
over
here.
to your left, the slideshow,
go.
hit that. Then it says from beginning,
From beginning.
there.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, so we're going to review some of the numbers we looked at last week. And my job basically in this is to present some of these numbers. We have Andrew Martin here from Negley and Chase to talk to us about some of the details. And then Lee also has some details about the soils that I'm not qualified to speak to. So we're beginning to get some drone pictures of the project. Those are really cool. You can see them on our various websites. And the next slide shows the previous.
I'm gonna go
Got
to the next
it?
one.
Yeah, let's go to the next one. There you go. So we brought this because this is a really cool picture, and you can see it on the library Facebook page, but I know people don't always look at that. So when we took down the chandeliers in Town Hall, they were in bad condition. They hadn't been cleaned since, probably 90 years. The candle sockets were all fraying and a real fire hazard. The wiring was the old cloth wiring. It was all a fire hazard. We were not very happy to find that. We worried a lot about what were we going to do about these fixtures, because replacing something like this would be ferociously expensive, because they were very great fixtures when they were purchased. We took them up to Conant. Conant was so happy to get these light fixtures. They're just delighted to be doing this refurbishment for us. They've put all new cones on them. They've cleaned off not only all the dirt, but they've also, I don't want to use the word polished, but they've gone ahead and shined them back up so they will glow the way they should. They've been rewired, and when they're all hung in place next summer in Town Hall, it's going to be really great. So I wanted to show you this because this is something obviously we can't see because they're at Conant. The guy who's working on this is so excited. He's like, this is my top project. I've been doing this for 25 years. This is great. I'm so happy. So I just wanted to show you something. You can't see this without a slide. So, all right. So you're going too fast, Lee.
I'm not trying.
All right. So basically, we want to talk to you tonight about the town contingency and how we would suggest expending that, and then a public discussion of the soils, the costs, and then the future state requirements that have been imposed upon us. So. All right, so the first thing to talk about is ways that we have reduced the project budget. The very first thing that you always do with a project like this, Lee, so they're going to come up one at a time as you hit that button, hopefully. Don't you have a down arrow you could use? Yeah. So value engineering to a project is basically is cost cutting. Since January 2018, we have identified in the project $500,000 in value engineering. Not all of that value engineering has been taken. Our project manager, what's Al's title? Yes, our clerk of the works, Al, has gotten to the point where he's like, these look like cuts, but they're not cuts you want to take. You'll end up with an inferior product. So we've been doing our value engineering. We have done voluntary fundraising. Since October last fall, we have raised $1 million. That $1 million was first allocated to lowering the bond, which was a condition of the original $500,000 donation. We've brought the bond down to lowered the bond just over 10%. So it's like 10.2%. After we accomplished that goal, the donor came back and said, I really support the library. It's clear you're not going to get any more donations to lower the bond. So they shifted their restriction to open it up to allow future fundraising to their match to be used to reduce the GMP. When we brought you the GMP in July, we pledged to the Selectboard that we would bring that GMP number down, and we have done that now with fundraising. So, and then the third category, the way to bring additional monies into the project budget is with in-kind donations, and these would be donations from local businesses. And we have just begun that process. There is no way for us to be able to predict what we might be able to bring in. So, but I want to point out that this is something now that is ongoing. All right, so the contingencies in July 2018, when you were brought all of this information, there are 3 contingencies within the budget. There was the design contingency from the architectural firm. That was spent out last spring on design changes that were required by the town. And let's see, I didn't write this line, Lee, reviewing board.
That'd be the DRB.
Oh, right, yes, okay, so during the town permitting process and going through the DRB, right, design changes were required that the company had to go back and charge us more for, so that contingency has been spent out. The second contingency is Negley and Chase's construction contingency. That is spent at their discretion, and Andrew will talk about that after I'm done. The third one is the town latent costs. So these are costs that the town carries, and a latent cost is a cost that you could not predict. And our contingency for that is $78,000. All right, and we now propose expending some of that town contingency. So to date, some additional state code requirements have come forward that we need to meet. And then there have been some latent project costs. At this time, these costs total approximately $65,500. So we recommend that we go ahead and spend part of the town contingency to cover that, this is what the contingency is for. So this is not really an unusual approach. This is what that contingency is for. The balance of $12,500 we feel we should hold in reserve because there is the possibility of additional latent costs appearing over the next probably couple of weeks. So that's the contingency. Then the third slide here, the last slide that I'm responsible for, is the soils. And I'm just going to run through with you the numbers. So for soils, we had testing costs. And those testing costs, so this goes pretty fastly because each number is separated out. So it's $15,000 for testing. Soil removal disposal was $99,000. Site remediation and monitoring, we're not actually sure what this is. We have been told that we are likely eligible for these future costs to be covered by the State Petroleum Cleanup Fund, and the deductible for that is $10,000, so that's in there. All right. Negley and Chase carried an allowance of $17,500 for potential soil problem, leaving us with a balance of $106,500. So that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Ruth.
Andrew, perhaps you can into some of the larger issues.
Maybe the thing that would be helpful to first talk about where we are with the slide here.
Andrew, before you start,
I'm sorry.
Want to let everybody in TV land know who you are?
Andrew Martin, CEO of Negley and Chase Construction. SW Cole was hired by the town to perform soil analysis and soil borings. There were 9 borings, I believe, done. And recommendations that came back from the soil report was we had a very high water table, and we also had a fair amount of clay. So this is early on in the project. We actually brought the elevation of the building up and deleted the basement to reduce the overall cost because of the costs associated with removing all of this material and putting structural fill back in, and then the work that would be associated with pumping of groundwater as the construction occurred, and then waterproofing essentially a bathtub where the structure would be sitting. What has happened is that the soil borings were done around the perimeter of the existing library and to this side or the south side as well as to the north. The soils that have been discovered are twofold. One are material that's not structurally sound or bearing that has to be removed and replaced. And we also found petroleum contaminated soil as well from a parent tank or storage facility that was there many years ago, of which there's no records apparently that it was removed. So there's 2 things going on. The soil that is contaminated needs to be removed and set aside, and that's taken to a landfill. The material that is not structurally compliant needs to be taken to somewhere else, and it was moved up to the O'Brien farm. And new material has to be brought in. So the total material that was replaced has to be replaced with new structural bearing material. The location of the bad material, both the petroleum contaminated material that had to be abated or remediated, and the mucky non-structural bearing material, was directly underneath, for the most part, the existing library. So there was no way to bore, and when we do for those that don't know what a drilling rig looks like, it is a drilling rig that comes out and bores down into the ground until it hit what's called refusal. And that, in a number of cases out here, was about 50, 60, 70 feet down until we either hit something like glacial till or rock or something, and that's bearing. The core is taken out, and the core is analyzed to determine what makes up that amount of material that's been sectioned essentially out of that hole. And all of those all looked fine. The problem was the bad material was directly underneath, the majority of it was directly underneath the existing library structure. And that's why it wasn't found, because you can't put a drill rig in the middle of the library when it's occupied. It's unfortunate, but just to speak to the group here, these things do happen. They're the nature of our business. And it's unfortunate, but I think the team as a whole really did a very collaborative and collective effort to try to reduce costs by avoiding the basement issue and raising the thing up out of the ground to remove the extra cost with hauling out the material if we had a full basement. So that's the soil information. Is there anything else on the soils particularly that?
Yeah, and this is purely just curiosity, but I would assume when the old library was built, they would have looked at soils when they built that library?
You would have assumed so, but that is a shallow structure that may not have gone as far as we do. In the new construction, we're down a little bit lower, so we're excavating more material than the existing library had. On top of that, there is change in the seismic codes now. So the material that was maybe suitable 30 years ago when the library was built, or was mid-'80s, I think, may not be at this point. So there's a structural engineer who works for VIA, the architectural team, and SW Cole. They came out and assessed the material and then told us and our subcontractor, which was the site contractor, to remove the material that was subpar. So that I suspect that it's probably a combination of both. It's probably the depth of the excavation as well as it's not being suitable to build on current codes.
Sean?
I have a question, and it's just a simple question from what you just said. You said these things do happen.
Sean,
I don't know construction?
you know the protocol. We
Oh. What's the
directed at us, and then we'll ask Andrew.
Oh, I didn't realize that protocol. Okay, so these things do happen. Why aren't they better planned for, with a bigger contingency that they are responsible for? Once again, I mean, we've heard through a lot of people who, I don't know if they know you, or they seem very plugged into the town and the library, that this is just the tip of the iceberg as to overages that are going to hit us, and they're going to hit us. So I want to know why it wasn't better planned for. This is your job. I mean, my job is to plan if costumes for a production go over, I put in an extra $5,000 if I think it's going to be bigger. If you didn't know this, if you knew you couldn't bore in the library while it was occupied, and that this may come up, knowing what was there before, wasn't this the town garage before? Wasn't there, what was there before? Knowing that you may get this, why wasn't it planned for? Once again, we get hit in the back end with more money. When the whole library passed with very few voices in the town who wanted it passed. So that is my question.
You want to respond?
Sure. if I had x-ray vision, I wouldn't be in this business. It's very difficult to be able to understand what is occurring in subsoil conditions. You could, and we could have, Sean, very easily done a boring in the middle of the library at tremendous expense and gone down and missed the area of the bad material, because it isn't layers like a cake. There are things called sand lenses, they're clay lenses that could be as big as this room, and then 20 feet in that direction is perfectly fine material. So it's a bit of a science, but it's also, to some degree, not always 100% accurate. Nothing in our business is. And this happens on a regular basis, and until they can find out some way to prepare a X-ray ground source penetrating system to read what the soil is, you can't avoid these things. The contingency is something that we recommend that any of our clients carry to offset any of these issues. And this was a very, very tight budget. So we were peeling away money wherever we could, to the point where we were actually not going up on top of the cupola to take the cupola apart to find out what was there in terms of potential rot, because we were concerned the project wasn't going to go forward, and we would have expended more money going up there, doing that research, and then having to put a Band-Aid on it than actually doing the work when there's the economy of scale. So I understand the frustration, but I think the due diligence, and I think we do it exceptionally well, and the town did. These things happen. It's a difficult thing to say, but there's very little that in my industry that is more difficult than reading the tea leaves about soil especially. And renovations are very difficult. You never know until you start taking apart a structure what you're up against.
It's a non-answer to me, but I understand, but, I mean, it's back to these things do happen. If these things do happen, they need to be planned for. In the budget. Yes, we're trying to scale things down, yes, we're trying to make everybody happy. But as your business say, I cannot scale this down because I don't know what's under that soil, I don't know what pocket's here, what pocket's there, but I need to put more in so that you don't get hit on the back end. So that's passed on to your people as a bigger budget, and maybe that wouldn't have passed to do the town hall renovation and the live renovation. Because it comes back to the pockets of the town that are, and we're still paying for railroad, we're still paying for everything.
Thanks, Joe. Susan?
Susan McClellan, Falls Road. Something was said about state codes, that there was some surprise with state codes. Aren't those fairly cut and dried when you're dealing with a building renovation like this? I mean, I guess I'm surprised with the state codes. I would think this is what the state requires, so that you would know what you would need to spend for that.
You want to respond?
Yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, some of those would be known. Sometimes it's hard to get clear answers from the people who administer those. Sometimes, again, you just get surprises. For example, the original plan, as I understand it, on the front porch of the historic town hall was simply to remove and replace the brick. No one could have known that when the brick was removed, we'd discover that the concrete foundation under it was crumbling.
And that requires a different
So, well, it adds complexity and cost. Then you find out the railings are rotten, but from a historic preservation perspective, folks want to keep the railings. But when you start taking things apart to certain levels, it triggers new codes. So if it was just a matter of removing brick and putting the railings back, we might have been fine. But once everything had to get taken out, now a new code gets triggered and you need additional railings in the middle of those stairs. And that kind of process just unfortunately tumbles through projects like this. When the fuel tanks were removed some years ago, the highway crew reused those tanks. They were not leaking. My understanding is they're still in use today. So there was no reason, for example, to anticipate the extent and breadth of petroleum contamination. If the tanks had been leaking at that time, would have been a whole different ballgame. But those things, there was no reason to think that would be as difficult a problem as it has turned out to be. There may be some ways to cover this cost as well that don't necessarily require additional taxpayer funds, and we can talk about those at an appropriate time.
Any other discussion? John?
Hello, John McCann, Lakeview Avenue. Just had two quick questions. One was about the value engineering, which I find very interesting. The number was 500,000 and not all of them were utilized. How much of that 5,000 was value engineered out successfully at the end?
Well, some of that is still being considered.
But was
Give
it
you two-
half? Was it a third? I mean, how much of that 500,000 got realized?
I believe much of it to date is realized, but
And
there's
do you know
still,
what items were value engineered out? Just large ticket items that might not have been included?
I defer to the library folks on.
One member of the committee. Should I come to the microphone?
Yeah, please,
Please.
Kevin.
Hi, I'm Kevin Unrath. I'm the library director. Andrew mentioned the change in the basement. That wasn't just a change based on the soil. It was also a change that made the whole project less expensive. Not to add a 5,000 square foot basement that had 8 feet that didn't have any program intent. It was just a space for future expansion. So we took that out, and that saved us, I think, close to $100,000 overall. We went through all of the millwork piece by piece and took out about 50% of the millwork in the building, and are replacing a lot of that with existing shelving that we moved. That's another large chunk that we value engineered. We looked at the HVAC system that was going in, and we went with the system that was least expensive that the engineers were willing to sign off on.
That was my fear.
Yeah, we.
That's what always happens.
Well, we didn't have a choice because we had to get the project. We had to get the project and budget, so we went with the system that the engineers felt would be acceptable. Yeah, but we went through today we were looking at a value engineering list for things like children's book bins. We took the fixtures out of the bathrooms in the old library so that if we needed to reinstall them in the new library, instead of buying new toilet paper dispensers and baby holders, we could reinstall them. And
It was really the HVAC system I was concerned about. Because that's
John,
the
you want to let,
so.
thanks. Any other commentary? Tom?
Just a question. The contaminated, petroleum contaminated soil was identified and has been removed. Was any effort expended to see if the contamination extended past the footprint of the new library? The reason I bring that up is someone had mentioned to me that they wondered if it's possible any contamination had migrated from the leaking gasoline tanks at the service station at the corner of Harbor Road. The other thing is that in the past, the school, this building where the school used to be, was heated by oil. I don't know if the tanks were underground or above ground, but I was wondering if it's possible the contamination wasn't necessarily, just confined to that one area, but is migrated in, especially if there are areas of clay in the soil.
Thanks, Tom.
So two answers to that. One, there will be some further excavation beginning very shortly to install subsurface stormwater drain pipes. So that will clearly give us some indication of the extent or potential migration. The other piece of it is now that the state is aware of this, they will require us to do a site investigation to determine answers to those very questions. And the company that we had engaged to do the original testing and oversight of the removal will prepare that plan for the state. And it's our understanding, as Ruth had mentioned earlier, that both the planning for that, any work that might be needed, should be covered by the Petroleum Contamination Fund, absent the $10,000 deductible. So again, you can't know till you start poking. We know that one outcome that we will have to install monitoring wells, and those have to be tested typically on an annual basis. Just like if you go to any gas station, roughly 20 years ago, they all had to replace their single wall underground tanks with double wall tanks, and they all have monitoring wells as well. If the levels don't indicate much of a problem, at some point the state does what they smack the site. They tell you, you're all set, you don't need to keep doing this anymore. It's important to note that the level of even the petroleum contamination was fairly low level, and it actually qualified to be landfilled, although we did not exercise that option. But it was not highly contaminated that needed to be very, super carefully handled and disposed of at extreme expense.
Linda?
Linda Reel, Falls Road. Lee, I think you just mentioned something called the Petroleum Contamination Fund. What is that?
I'm sorry, if I did, I meant to call it the Petroleum Cleanup Fund, so I apologize for that. It's a fund administered by the state designed to be helpful to landowners in these very cases where underground contamination is discovered. And again, they didn't, it was a peculiar situation. We had inquired of the state of looking for help with the initial cleanup costs. It was kind of a catch-22, because on one hand, they said, well, since you didn't discover it in advance and have a cleanup plan approved in advance, we won't cover it. But even if you did, we won't cover it because there's too much soil. So now going forward, they've told us that we need to do this site investigation, and any work covered under that, we are told, and we will get confirmation as we work through the process, is supposed to be covered by this state fund that's intended to help landowners clean these things up. The purpose being to discourage people from finding these problems and essentially hiding them, because it can be very expensive to deal with. And again, there's a $10,000 deductible. Anything above that is supposed to be covered by that state fund.
We introduced this at the last meeting, as many of you know, in anticipation of future events which involve us in terms of approving change orders. And as an attempt, continuing attempt now, as you've noticed with Ruth and Kathy being here at every meeting, to keep everybody up to speed on what's happening and how the project is going. We were not shy to indicate that we have some problems and that we are going to have to find funds to solve them. There's no question. I think in discussing it in some detail with the committee, my sense is that we have really reached a point where trying to wring more blood out of the project stone in terms of furniture, floor coverings, bookshelves is no longer viable. I mean, I think any of you, and they'd be welcome to take you through the cost-cutting efforts to this point, would be impressed to know that they're really kind of at rock bottom. And we want a library of which we can be proud that people can go in and sit down in, among other things. So I think we've kind of reached our limits there. Some have suggested redirecting some of the privately raised funds. We've learned that there's some questions to think about there in terms of redirecting a gift. When you and I and others make a gift, we might not be very happy the next morning to wake up and learn it's been used for an entirely different purpose, and the person who has the money is off in Spain. There's some very serious questions about redirecting the use of original gifts. That leaves us with several possibilities, one of which is fortunate in that we are about to engage budget for the 2019-20 year, beginning July 1. And some of these costs are potentially going to be able to be paid in that next fiscal year, which means we have a potential to actively budget for them in the next several weeks. In that case, it isn't necessarily added tax burden, because there may be other things that we do not budget or cannot budget for. And that we'll simply see in the process. Some of these may in the end turn out to be fewer dollars or more. I hesitate at the pun because there's nothing funny about it, but the real spoiler is this figure that's showing up here now, which I think in my sense is we can't recover that from existing project monies or privately raised funds. We're going to have to bare our knuckles in the budget, in potential use of reserves down the road, and monitor it very carefully in terms of keeping control of the figure as it is. And we wanted to be sure tonight you understood that we feel that's a pretty principal obligation at this point, and we work on it pretty much daily. It's to thank the committee for all of its efforts. I think they would feel a little relief if they realized they weren't going to be burdened necessarily with this to find it now. We're all town, and it's a town obligation, and we will seek means of meeting this obligation other than from funds that are directed to shelving and other essentials of the library. So we welcome your input. The committee, I know, would welcome any inquiry. Their meetings are public. You're more than welcome to come and attend and sit and listen to the discussions. Nobody is kidding anybody that these numbers are going to be the same in the next month. We hope we have no more surprises. We hope we have no more discoveries. But a project of this magnitude and complexity is going to deliver some unexpected turns, and we have to be prepared for that. So again, to repeat, it was our effort tonight to make you aware of the detail and to give you some idea of how we think it's best to approach meeting this $100,000 need, call it. And we very much value your input and suggestions and welcome them at any time. Vivian?
Vivian Jordan, Shelburne resident. Just a simple question. I think that $25,000, which really is kind of a drop in the bucket, but still it's $25,000 when you're talking about transferring toilet paper holders and things like that, to repave the rest of this lot. Is there any decision on that? Because I think that is a total waste of $25,000
We're going to probably address that in budget as a potential 2019-2020 expense. It comes at the very end of the project. And that's an example of something that may be best treated as a capital investment in town facilities and not a feature of a library town hall project.
Okay.
And that's sort of the other interesting thing is that some expenses of this kind are occurring because of deferred maintenance. And this is not going to be news in the next several years, beginning with those windows. And as many of you know, with the conditions of town facilities, this is going to be kind of a regular feature. It may be that we make a decision to create a deferred maintenance category and begin putting some money away to deal with that, as a routine. So I appreciate the question, because some of these simply have to be removed from any thought of project funding. Their character and their amounts are going to suggest some other approaches, and in that case, we will possibly benefit from the fact that the work largely is going to be done in the new fiscal year.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, any discussion?
Yeah, I'd just like to sort of possibly give a different take on your explanation, or at least from what I'm hearing, is essentially what we have here is an accounting issue. Is, where do these expenses come out of? And it seems to me that the important thing to recognize is that the Library and Town Center project was funded through a bond vote for a specific amount of money. And it seems to me that it's incumbent on us as policymakers, as decision makers, that whatever costs are associated with the Library and Town project be within the bond, be within the realm of the bond that was passed. The comment about, with the raised funds, whether that goes for one or another, seems to be an accounting issue as to what gets paid for what funds or what other. But I think if the concept that costs that are associated with this project would come out of any other funds other than the bond that was approved by the voters for this project, I have some problems with, because that's the nature of how it was presented to the citizens, that this is a project that we're going to build for X amount of money. And so therefore, and I think people have said, then we should, whatever the situation is, we need to stay within that figure for the Library and Town Center project. If more money is needed, maybe another bond is required to access additional funds. But to take it out of other places, I have some concerns about that.
Anybody else?
So, I just have, I guess I have two minds about this. Josh, I don't disagree with you. I also think that the voters, when they voted to pass that bond, they voted to pay for a library. So at the end of the day, they want a library. And so the question is how much of a library do we still have to do the entire thing? It looks like there was already a large concession made about the basement. And when that was first planned, the cost of putting in a basement was minimal compared to the overall cost of the budget. But then problems arise, such as the elevated water table and the cost of being able to waterproof that. So they cut it. And that's kind of what I expect the committee to do, to make those, hard choices to try and keep it within budget. And if they keep making these hard choices, and at some point they're like, well, we can't put any books back in. There's no bookshelves, there's no furniture, we'll have a shell, and that's it. Or is there something else that can be done? Maybe we only put in a certain amount of the collection and we don't put in the rest of the collection. Is there something that can be phased? I think it's a question worth asking. The other thing that I worry about is scope creep. The whole idea about the town hall is we knew when we separated the library from the town hall, there was some work that had to be done. But I think everybody knew that you kind of touch that building and something's going to crumble. And we heard from concerned citizens at the last meeting about deferred maintenance. And that's what the town's been doing. Don't touch it. Don't touch it. It's standing just the way it is. Don't look at it and don't blow on it. But that's, you start uncovering one thing and then you find one more problem. I think that was kind of easy to anticipate, but we've made decisions along the way and here we are. So, one of my thoughts was maybe we don't put the porch back on the town hall and we leave it the way that it is. And then we put it on for a bond for the next, in 2 years, or we budget for it. It would look ugly. It would look awful. I think it would be pretty motivating to people in the town who care about the town hall to pay for it to be rebuilt. And go ahead.
Which is a reasonable
It was just an idea. I don't know if it's reasonable or not. It was just an idea. But I do worry about the town hall, and the more we do, I feel like it's going to be one more thing. And we even during the planning of it, when even just deciding there's the minimal amount, it was like, yeah, but we could also do the floors need to be redone, and we could do this, and we could do this. And eventually all those great ideas, because that all could be done to the town hall, we pared everything back because it was just ballooning the costs out of control. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Colleen. Mary? Mary, are you still?
I am hanging in.
Okay. Jamie, you got-
Are you seeking comment from me?
yes, I wondered if you had any thoughts?
Well, yeah, I have thoughts, but I'm afraid I don't have any answers, which is really what would be more helpful, I think, in terms of the situation the board finds itself in. I would say that, I think we should all remember that the construction that's going forward is something that was voted for by members of the Shelburne voting community. And it would not have gone forward without that vote. So I hope that people remember that, and I don't think there's been any mal or misfeasance on anyone's part here. Confronted with a problem that doesn't have any easy answers. And I think everybody's working hard and in good faith to deal with this problem, and it is what it is. It's difficult, but I don't think there's any magic answer here. And I feel everyone is working extremely hard, particularly the volunteers, Kathy and Ruth, and also Negley and Chase, a highly reputable construction company. In my view, it's an unavoidable thing that occurs in construction in a common way. I'm certainly no expert in this area. I am a little surprised that the slush funds, for lack of a better phrase, or the contingency funds, were not larger. But that horse left the stable before this particular iteration of the board came to the table. So we are where we are. So I appreciate the public's comments. I think it is difficult. What I really want to see are some solutions, and I appreciate both Josh's and Colleen's suggestions. I don't have anything else to add, or I don't feel strongly one way or the other. I think that I think we all confront these problems in our daily lives where you have exigencies that occur that you have to address. And everyone, I think, is doing their best to do that. So that's all I have to say.
Thanks, Mary.
I don't have much to add given the hour, so I'm open to thinking creatively about this. I agree that we don't have any answers right now,
Yeah.
but everybody's working in good faith, and people are trying, and I understand the frustration and head shaking that we see. It's that we're doing our best up here, and ultimately we're accountable for it. So I think we should just keep working through this.
Yeah, and I think our next
more.
steps as we approach budget and then get into budget are to keep working the question of where we can find the funding that seems most acceptable to most, and you can know that it's a pretty major priority of ours. And I'm pleased to know that I think most people agree that the committee should feel a little less burdened by that problem. It's really ours. So I'm hopeful that they go home with a little less load on their shoulders. So, Andrew, we thank you very much for coming and for the work you're doing, and We're really pleased with progress to date. Ruth and Kathy, anything you want to add? Or? Thank you. Thank you very much for hanging in there. We appreciate that. Any other further discussion? Hearing none, we'll move on to the next item, which I very carefully noted is number 14. And that's the priority list work plan. As a quick introduction, you'll recall we moved this forward from the last meeting at which we made the point that this work plan had been designed to as a parallel track in Lee's tenure as interim, given that his contract was to expire at the end of December. So we had a parallel track of what priorities need to be worked and with what consumption of energy and time. And that now is, of course, the situation's changed markedly. So with that introduction, you want to start off the discussion, Josh?
I'd just like to note, if I may, there's copies of this document on the table if anyone would like to follow along with the discussion.
Well, I certainly appreciate, Lee, that you're building out this based on. I guess my overall plan is what to do with this. It's just like, well, I don't remember a discussion necessarily on all of these items as to which priority they fit on. Other things have been put on. We have sort of really broad categories in priority one as initiatives not yet identified, which pretty much you can, drive a steamship through. So, I'm trying to find the practical, how do we work with this? And along that so how do we then take items that are on this list and put them onto agendas? And how does that happen? And how do, so I think it's great that we've made a list. How the priorities are identified, and that probably is, we can make that squishy. But it's like, okay, great. Now we got this. What do we do with it?
Well, one form it took is the goals and objectives that we're developing for Lee's contract. So there's a pretty direct connection there.
Indeed.
In a sense, we've extended the time to something that was fairly immediate, like year end, to now something that's could be a year long. First. Second, I think there's a constant benefit to having these in front of us to keep us aware of where we feel there are priorities, and maybe dim our enthusiasm for stuff that just doesn't meet that same standard. And third, I think it's a little bit of an abstract exercise at this time of the year, since so much of this stuff is year end and upon us. There's really, it's sort of no-brainer about what the priorities are in terms of, as we've dealt with earlier tonight with hearings and comp plan and budget and so on. So I think the value finally for us tonight is the residual one of keeping in front of us stuff that we think is very important that we should address, and marking things that, while they may not be immediate and that important, are nevertheless things we want to keep, on the front burner. It's too easy for things to fall off when they don't deserve a lot of attention. So my sense of it is we may want to wait on development of the goals and objectives with Lee as a contract matter, and then return to this informed by those.
I guess just following up on that, if new things do come up, how do they get, what's the process? This is more process oriented of how do we deal with this and how do other things get put on as they come up? How do we prioritize? Is this a select board wide decision? How, I mean, things, things will come up, on a day-to-day basis that the town manager has to deal with. He's not going to necessarily need to come back to the select board and say, all right, which my priority do I put this in? So one of the things that might be useful is to separate out in here, what, and I think this is where you started on this, and so somehow it's sort of maybe got jumbled up, is what are the town manager issues and priorities, and what are the select board issues and priorities?
Yeah.
And figure out, because that will help figure out what gets put on our agenda. And right now, it's all put together. And I think for us to both help us and Lee is maybe to figure out where's the division of labor here.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point about what generates priorities. I mean, some of them are just because we're a town and
Right.
we're a municipal organization and we've got them. Some of them are policy interests of our own or our majority. Some of them are routine chock-a-block decisions that just get made daily that you feel are require board level attention or by statute must. I don't know, my sense of it is that we bring a sense of priority to every meeting, some of which are new, some of which are other ones that we worked on or have completed. I think I'm not begging the question, but for the next month, I think we can probably rely on the goals and objectives as a source, and the finishing up of the year end, the comp plan and the budget, and then return to this in some maybe other form, Josh. I agree with you that this doesn't need to result from one retreat per year. On the other hand, we can't keep having it on the agenda,
Right.
somewhere there's an in
Well,
between.
I would think that we should try to identify, one or two of these items to stick on the agenda every meeting and try to make some progress on it. Even how to do that, I guess, is anyone's guess. I mean, we all can offer our
Well, if they
our
don't
choices.
have priority, then we wouldn't be making them priorities.
Right.
So we could probably
But
trust ourselves that.
Which prior?
Well, that's a problem.
It is, yeah. It can be to some extent just a never-ending decision-making. I think, again, the practical reality is much of our workload in the next 60 days is going to be self-defined.
Yeah.
Budget, now we've warned hearings for town plan and zoning amendments. Still need to conclude the contract, which will include discussion of goals and objectives, which feeds right back into this.
But if I look at this agenda for tonight,
Believe me, I know.
how many things got added to this, and how did they get added that they weren't on this priority list, but things come up? So it's like, and not to,
And we probably have a few that didn't need to be
right,
added at this point.
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, this is what I'm saying is how do we make progress, even though we're not necessarily going to say, we're not going to talk about anything other than budget and hearings and other things we have to do, and nothing else gets put on the agenda. We could take that position. I don't think that will help us, but I think we need to have a fairly good understanding of how things get off of our priority list and on the agenda, and what doesn't get on the agenda. What don't we have to or we do?
That's his job, ultimately, right? I mean, the chair
Well-
sets the agenda. I think this is a good list. I think it's a nice planning tool, and it's not exhaustive, and it's directional, and
Well,
I think a periodic check-in to get a pulse check from the community is good,
and
right?
then-
We have
then
folks
that-
here who will weigh in on some of this and say, maybe this should be priority one, and that one should be
Okay.
pushed down, and that's great
But I will
for
go,
us to know, but
sorry.
it's okay.
I'm sorry.
Beyond that, I think,
Okay.
I mean, the way that our board is set up, the chair sets the agenda, and this will help inform
Okay.
the agenda setting.
And that's right. But if you look under priority 3, number 2 on that is the revision of select board rules, which we discussed in April, which made the setting of the agenda more of a collaborative process than a chair process. Okay, so you can't have one, you can't say, okay, you know, we've suggested ways and changes in our procedure, but we haven't gotten those changes in our procedure on the agenda. And then
Listen, I think we're collaborating right now by setting the agenda.
I agree. I'm just
So
trying to
I'm
get
with
that,
you. Yeah.
that process out on the table, saying, okay, how are we going to do this in a collaborative manner?
That's an interesting point, because I think what we've done is done exactly that, collaborated on the agenda. I mean, we've made it a very open matter. There's no gatekeeping. And perhaps in that sense, we feel we've accomplished some of the intent of rules, which otherwise have not risen to the priority that a lot of other things have. And I appreciate the tight loop that you're calling attention to, but I do think it's a tool. I do think for the moment we have another effort in goals and objectives that are going to be very informative to this whole process, and indeed more expansive, because they're going to involve the town manager directly, who's going to have a role in what he feels are. Because I think that's the important point, that we're together, that we collaborate with the town manager and ourselves. So, is there any Bruce?
Bruce Nunziata. Jerry, I kind of agree with your sort of defense of this, and great question by Josh, but I like seeing this. I think it's good for you to have it in front of you and know what you're going to talk about and how amongst you you've prioritized things. I do think it's important for us to see it, because, you know, we're supposed to give you or want to give you feedback and say, hey, you know, I don't agree with this, which I don't. I just want to make a point when you're, you know, the idea of the concept of doing something like this, I think, is great. But it gives us something to work with too, as members of the community. You know, my point is, you know what I'm going to talk about, what I talk about every time. When I see safety, you know, that takes a special weight. It's to put anything that has the word safety in it, you know, buried down in the middle of priority 2. I just kind of question that. And then I see something in the priority 1, like a dog park. You know, people may go to the dog park once, twice a week. It's great. I have nothing against the dog park. But safety, we live 24/7. You know, we step outside our door, we're dealing with this. Moms with kids are dealing with traffic safety. So I like the concept, and I like the idea that maybe we have an opportunity to come here and, you know, make a point and make a case for juggling some of this stuff around.
Thanks. Yeah. And I'm sure we could do a better job, and I can do a better job describing some of these things, because you make an interesting point. The dog park committee had more to do with establishing communication with the agency, which had gone moribund for about 3 months. And that's why communication with the agency was really the activity. Solving the dog park isn't going to happen immediately, and it is not a front seat priority for us, given comp plan and budget. But establishing the communication with the Department of DEC was very much a priority. And once,
I followed that issue. I'm aware of it,
Yeah,
but I know that earlier on, the traffic safety was a high priority, and I see it now. I see it getting bumped down, and I see the dog park up there. So.
Well, but, you know, we don't want to say bump down. We've got just so much room, and it's hard to compete with budget and comp plan and a town manager contract and a few other things. So, but I'm glad you recognize the effort, which is to do something more than publish a retreat or list after a retreat once a year, and short of deciding by group which items we should have on the agenda that night as we meet. I mean, somewhere in between.
I think it gives us a handle of what's going on, and
Sure.
and also
and us too.
yourselves.
Yeah, us too. Thanks, Bruce.
And
Hey.
this will be a work in progress, too. It's
Yeah.
not a fixed in stone.
We may arrive at a form that this is a routine. Maybe we have an item each time about, do you want to take a look
Yeah,
at the,
that's what
you
I'm
know,
thinking. We,
just a
just see
constant
what it is.
item in the agenda, and that's sort of where we've been heading. So I'd like to just have us wait until we do Lee's thing and then come back. And
That's fine.
as he says, it's pretty self-defined for the rest of the month, for the rest of the year. So, thank you. The next the next item is an Innovative Idea Award. This is something that I proposed to my fellow members in anticipation of the budget year 2020. I'm developing some thoughts about that being an opportunity to talk a lot about Shelburne's future and the vision for which, and you can see some dime store, borrowings I'm doing from 2020. But this is an idea that that I'm proposing that would ask department and office heads of the town to respond to a question having to do with what would their response be to serious technological, economic, and political changes in the next 3 to 5 years. And there were some examples in the police department case. You've heard me talk about self-driving cars. In the treasurer finance case, it would be use of blockchain technology to pay fees and taxes. In the planning and zoning case, it would be an emergent consensus in the community to recognize the potential for careful review of zoning and other regulatory provisions that govern business attraction and location, and so on. So the idea was every department thinks a little bit in 250 words or less, what's coming and how you're preparing for it and what the effects might be on your budget and even to the extent of things like staffing. And it's called iForward, the 2018 Innovation Prize. The prize will be quite minimal and is not identified at this time.
Well, okay, thank you. And I'm just trying to tie these things
more
together.
assigned topics would be welcome.
No, I'm just just tying these together. Under priority 3, there was a item on gifts and awards, of developing a policy for
Yes.
gifts and awards.
Yes.
So which do you do first?
I've avoided this entirely, as you'll notice by saying the panel is secret, the award is secret, who pays for it is secret, and it will not violate any policy which has been yet developed.
I heard de minimis in there, too.
Yeah. Okay.
It may be a
I
piece of
guess
leftover pizza. No, I'm not kidding you. But this, I think, is just a kind of a team-building effort. You can go for it or not. I really, it was just an idea. These submissions would be due on the day we do the day-long budget. And we've limited the expectation to a page or half a page, and I think it'd be fun to kind of hear what folks say, and if you're okay with it, we could ask Lee to pursue it. No, I was very careful about. Any other comment?
I like the idea. I mean, it's a quick turn, 2 weeks for department heads to do this, so I would just keep it a couple paragraphs or two and something that they can sketch out. For fun. There's no pressure. It's
a fun thing.
Yeah,
And then
the
I think
expectations
if it's
are
taken like that, I think
Right.
it would be a fun thing.
Oh, it's entirely a team-building
be,
thing. And,
right.
I can't wait to hear how the police are going to deal with self-driving cars, stopping them. I don't know who you stop. A self-driving car goes down the road. I don't know, who do you stop? Who do you ticket? Anyway, so that's the idea. The next item was the Colleen Haag Award. I also proposed to you in a note that we establish a process, give breadth to the award for 2018. I feel very, very strongly that should be a continuous matter. and propose to you that this be that the entire process be in the hands of a committee independent of the board. And I felt that way because my sense is that that award is a singular honor of the community, just as our election is a singular honor. And I don't think there should be anything between the community and the award. And I think we would ask someone to initiate that process, develop some rules so that we were very assured the process was entirely public, fair, objective, apolitical, and such. We would of course provide the award itself and the arrangements at town meeting for it, and the organizers of the committee could determine their own path, and I urge all of us to support that idea.
Could you explain for me better what you mean by this being completely separate from the board and the committee? I mean, why wouldn't we just establish a Colleen Haag Award committee that would function in the same way that every other town committee functions?
I think of it in two ways. One of the concerns that was raised in the recent past was that it was politicized.
Mm-hmm.
This is a political body. I think the minute the select board determines the committee and the process, it's a political decision. Whether it's benign or not is beside the point. It's a political decision. I don't think my sense is there should be no filter between the community and the award, just as there's no filter between the community and whom they elect. Secondly, I wouldn't want to burden, in this particular case, the organizers with the formality of an advisory body to the board.
But I'm still struggling when I read I don't necessarily disagree with your concept. I'm just trying to figure out how you can create a process out of essentially thin air, because someone has to select the individuals who would serve on this committee. And how does that, I don't think tonight we could come up with that process, or at least unless you can give me a good idea of how people, and I think this is probably the most important part, is how would people be selected and who would be the selectors of the members of this committee? I mean, clearly we have a process for other town committees. It seems to me, unless you put it as an elected office, that the town citizens can vote on who do you want on the committee. I'm trying to understand a process that can be put into place that will satisfy the need for town citizen representation or citizen choice on who makes this. Now, maybe it's you get all of the different community organizations in the town to nominate someone, but then who makes the selection from that nomination? I mean, I don't have an answer. I'm just saying these are the problems I see in that if you're going to have, as you say, a committee to represent community interests, how do you effectively and non-judgmentally or non-biased way find the people, select the people to be on the committee?
Well, I proposed and approached Jim Brangan, asking him if he would be willing, and Colleen Haag, if in both cases, if they would be willing to serve as organizers the committee. In Colleen's case, she preferred not to have that director role, but wished to be a part of the process and would happily consult and advise and assist. Jim was very positive about his potential role, and my proposal is to ask Jim to organize it, to seek the 2 or 3 or other, whatever, a small number of others that he would feel suitable, and to review with us at a near point in time what process he planned to follow to ensure that the selection was public, fair, and objective.
Well, but again, he's the one who gets to choose who those
Yes, he
people.
would choose.
And this is, I have a concern, because, as you say, you don't want this to be a political decision. But there were, and I'm pretty agnostic on that, but I'd like to point out that the choice of Jim for receiving the award seemed to have a certain political overtone to it as well. So I do have some concerns whether he may or may not be the right person to do it, and that to give one person choose one person to organize this, it seems like you're going back and forth on your efforts to depoliticize on one side, but not having a clear process by which anyone in the town could participate in this process.
Well, I don't know how you avoid some choice here, Josh, because you can sit here and wish it to occur out of a genie bottle, but you have to make a choice to get it going. And the choice would be, as I propose, to ask Jim to organize it. And from that point on, we entrust, as we do to all of our fellow citizens and volunteers, that he will return with a process that fully is satisfactory in terms of its inclusiveness, in terms of its how representative it is of the town. And so yes, you do make an initial choice. I frankly don't know how you avoid that.
Other than to fall back on what we've already established as a regular committee process.
In which case, we would be January, still talking about this, Josh. I mean, it's the usual. I don't see that you have the month of December to spend on this and make an award in a very, very short, compressed period of time. That's my sense of it.
I would like to see some other options for this.
That's fine, too.
I like the idea of a more informal and streamlined approach to this. I appreciate Josh's points on a committee for this, but I think Jim's a former recipient of this award, and he's clearly someone who's well recognized and respected in the community. So I trust that he'll do the right thing on this and keep us apprised of process recommendations, and we'll be very transparent.
I feel the exact same way as Jamie. I feel the same as Jamie.
Mary?
I have very mixed views on all of this, and in view of the hour and the work left before us and the fact that we haven't had a break in over 3 hours, I'd like to reserve my comments to another day. I would actually prefer to push this off to another meeting.
I'm okay with making a motion. And
Let's
okay.
let Linda. You want to comment, Linda, before we make a motion?
Falls Road. I think the idea of finding a person who's willing to create some kind of process is a good idea. Maybe there could be talk about more than one potential candidate to do that, and then you folks would approve the process, which to me would feel better than just saying one person develops the process and that's going to be it.
Agreed.
You know, that was the next, that was a
what Jerry
following
sketched
step,
out,
Linda, that we were going to, and Jim was willing to come back to us and say, here's what I outline as the process. Furthermore, everyone was invited to to give Jim names that they thought might be good people to be on the committee, as indeed everybody is.
Anyone in the community.
Yeah, everyone in the community, so.
Reach out to Jim.
But we did ask Jim, would he be willing then to come back to us in a near meeting and take us through with what he planned as the process altogether, so. Oh,
So, I move to reactivate the Colleen Haag Award and to designate Jim Branyan as the organizing lead and to come back to the select board with his views on a process of how to establish and a selection and to go from there.
a second?
Second.
Jamie seconds. For any further discussion, Josh?
No, I agree with Mary. I think this is something that we could easily give some additional thought to and come up with additional options.
All right, any further discussion? Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, and those opposed?
Nay?
Josh, Mary?
Nay.
Two nays.
You have to have a
Josh and
roll
Mary.
call vote.
The next,
Yeah, you have to have a roll call vote. If it's
Didn't
not
have a
unanimous.
unanimous vote.
correct, Josh is an A, Mary's an A, I'm an aye, Jamie's an
Aye.
aye, Colleen's an aye. The next item is to consider entering executive session for pursuant to 1 Vermont statutes annotated 313 para 3 para for contract negotiations regarding appointment or employment of a public officer, in this case the town manager. There will be no one else invited to join us. Are there motions, several of them?
Sure. Move to find that premature general public knowledge regarding the appointment or employment of a public officer would clearly place the town at a substantial disadvantage. Move to enter, sorry, you need to call the vote on that?
Colleen seconds. Any discussion? Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it.
Move to enter executive session pursuant to 1 VSA, Section 313-1A, regarding the appointment or employment of a public officer, and invite the interim town manager to participate as necessary. We may meet first,
Good point.
and then we'll invite Lee in.
Second.
Very good point. Any discussion? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed? The ayes have it, including you, Mary.
Guess not.
Good point.
Yes.
Yes.
You can wait. I'm not sure if we would, what
I
we
don't
might
think it'll
come back
be-
with, yeah. Huh?
Yeah, I think we will come back.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what the
we
timing
have
might
to
be,
exit.
but
Yeah.
I would keep it open, and shouldn't be so long, Manny. Executive session and resume general session. Moved by Josh,
Second.
seconded by Colleen. Any discussion? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Mary is not with us at this point, so the ayes have it 4-0. And would you like to make a?
I
Move to
don't,
adjourn.
We are
I don't
continuing,
have, continued
contract
negotiations
negotiations with Lee Crone.
with Lee. That's it.
Okay, move to adjourn.
Adjourn. Josh moves. Colleen seconds. Hearing no discussion, those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And again, Mary not voting for being, not for reason of not being present. The ayes have it. Thank you.
Thanks,
It was
everybody.
in the email,
Yeah, it was.
but I'm like, I don't.
We had a bunch. There were so many meetings.
Yeah.